I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're going to share an excerpt from our Dispatches from Planet Albany podcast, where we dove into the world of campaign mail, which you've likely been inundated with this spring if you live in a district with a competitive primary, because despite the importance of in-person contacts, as well as the directness of online advertising, mail pieces remain a critical way for candidates to define themselves and their opponents, as well as remind voters when it's time to hit the polls. And for this conversation, we spoke with Trip Yang, founder and CEO of Trip Yang Strategies.
Direct mail has always been a mainstay of campaigns. The reason is this: of all the various forms of paid communications, think about direct mail, TV, digital. There's versions of this, right? There's linear cable and broadcast TV.
Sure.
There's meta digital. There's YouTube digital. There's streaming. Different forms of this. All of them are very important. All of them have to go together to win a large competitive race. But direct mail is the most targeted, meaning you can directly target someone from the voter file, getting their mailing address and sending them a piece of mail. In this case, it is the most efficient way to target someone to raise your name ID of a candidate, to raise the name ID of an issue, to increase the favorables, to get your message out there. So it has always been a mainstay and always will be a mainstay of political campaigns as well as public affairs campaigns.
Well, campaign mail can take a lot of different forms, and you're trying to convey different things, maybe at different stages of a campaign, like introducing the candidate early on, maybe attacking the opponent at some point if you need to do that, and then sort of providing a closing message with that
Yeah.
call to vote around election day. Can you expand a little bit on how
Yeah.
you approach mail and how it might different or how it might differ based on a candidate's position in the race? Like if they're a front runner who might be well known or an underdog who
Yeah.
needs to kind of define themselves?
The good political strategy firms do this. The bad ones are just lazy about it. The good ones tailor the direct mail program to the story and the narrative of that campaign. The bad firms simply just, they copy paste cookie cutter. I think all your listeners, they've seen good mail, they've seen bad mail. So a good mail program is one that communicates a story from the first piece to the last piece, is tailor made. So, for example, let's say you're running in an open state Senate seat. Your candidate doesn't have that much name ID, but has got a good chance of winning. It's an open seat. There's no incumbent. You may want a six-piece mail program where the first one is about an intro, talking about a biography of the candidate, their values, how they got involved before they ran for office, the community advocacy, maybe pictures of them with their family,
Sure.
for example. The second one might be on the biggest issue facing the electorate here in New York State, from upstate to Hudson Valley to New York City to Long Island. Most of the time, it's affordability. So some level of affordability message often is a really good mail piece for your second one. Your third one might be different depending on the area. In some areas, you may want one that talks specifically about housing. Some areas may want something that talks specifically about healthcare, for example. But you want another issue advocacy mailer. Sometimes, depending on the race, you may want a segment mail. For example, if the district has a large Black electorate or Latino or an Asian electorate, you may want a segment mail, sometimes multilingual mail, which our firm has done a lot based on that community. So it's very culturally competent in
Sure.
language specific mail. You may want to have that in your package. Sometimes you may not. If you're doing mail, and for example, the Upper West Side, maybe you don't need to have a mail piece that's in anything other than just the English language, and that's fine too. You often want to have a closing message, a GOTV mail piece that has voting information, early voting information, link where voters can find out where their poll site is, future endorsements that the candidate is endorsed by. So these are some of the staples. And then, if you're an insurgent candidate, if you're an underdog, you may want to do some negative contrast mail pieces where you're highlighting some of the flaws, on record flaws of your opponent. Generally, a rule of thumb is to keep the professionalism of the industry intact. Anytime you do negative or contrast mail, you want to have a link, a media link where your claim is substantiated. So if someone, for example, said defund the police in 2020, you want to have a link to that media story from that time period that shows that your opponent said that. But that's generally the gist of a mail program. It needs to be tailored and it needs to be well thought out, intention, and it needs to have a good story from beginning to end of the program.
And what about the actual type of mail itself. I mean, a lot of people are familiar with the postcard type of mailer where
Yeah.
there's images and text on both sides, but they can
Yep.
be more complicated than that, right? I mean, you can get those
Yeah.
trifolds, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Look, you can really be creative here. The most common mail sizes are often 8.5 by 11, which is just, you have messaging on the front, messaging on the back. Sometimes you want to do a fold.
Hmm.
When you have a message that you really want to communicate, a fold will often be 8.5 by 22. So you have double the real estate. Essentially, you have messages and images on four sides as opposed to two. That's really good sometimes for an intro mail piece, especially if you have a candidate who's very photogenic and they have a young family who's very, very photogenic. You often want to do an 8.5 by 22. We've been doing, for example, Grace Lee, who is an assembly member in Manhattan and I believe is poised to be a state senate. We've done her mail for many years now. The intro mail piece that we've done for her, because she does have a very young photogenic family, husband, kids.
I was thinking about that. Yes, she's very stylish.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have we have her mail actually in
I
my
can see it over your
office right
shoulder.
behind me. We use that as a way to train our staff on how to write a good mail program. So we have our six-piece mail program behind me from her 2022 campaign. An intro mailer, you often want to do an 8.5 by 22. An 11 by 17 is the same thing. It's just the orientation's a little bit different. So those are two common ones. And then sometimes if you want to, save a little bit of money, sometimes you can do like a postcard mailer. Postcard is often a 4 by 7. That's very common, especially if you're sending mail around the holidays, for example, in December, saying, the candidate wishes you a happy holidays, Merry Christmas. But the most common mail pieces are usually an 8.5 by 11, and 8.5 by 22 / 11 by 17. Those are the same.
Do you have any rules of thumb as it pertains to who you like to send mail to or who you think maybe mail's not as effective to send to?
Mail is good for all audience members. It has historically been better for middle-aged and seniors, but
Hmm.
you should include young voters, in your mail universe. Also say this though, most electorates, the average voter is older than 40 years old. It is very rare to get a Mamdani election,
Sure.
in June 2025, where 18 to 39-year-olds were the largest electorate. It's very rare. That's the first time ever in modern New York City history. That being said, even the Mamdani campaign, which was focused on turning out young voters, even they did mail, right? So you should include young voters in your mail program for sure. They absolutely historically have been very effective with middle-aged and older voters. Generally, rule of thumb, and this goes for all forms of paid communications, you want to target a little bit more than what you expect the expected turnout's going to be. A good rule of thumb is you probably want to target a universe that's 20% bigger than what you expect the actual turnout to be. So, for example, if I'm running in a state assembly district and I think it's going to be 10,000 voters on primary day, this is very common in Queens or, for example, 10,000 voters on primary day. My mail targeting, I may want to target 12,000
Sure.
voters. The reason why is like you want to put out a broad net to catch a lot of these first-time registrants, first-time voters, etc., so that your message is communicated to them.
Some of the best practices for a mail piece include avoiding writing like an essay's worth of text and using maybe buzzwords that people don't connect with, things that don't resonate with the regular voter, or maybe not enough engaging pictures. I'm curious when you look at a mail piece, maybe a competitor's mail piece, or even just a race you're following. What are you looking for at that mail piece? How do you go about judging it, whether it was
Yeah,
good or bad?
what we like the most is the pictures have to be very good, high quality pictures. That's the first thing a voter sees. Our rule of thumb is a voter has to look at this in 5 seconds or less and have a positive emotion, right? A positive emotion. They like our candidate, they like our message. Or if we're doing a contrast, a negative mailer, they have a negative emotion about our opponent. That's also our intention. But 5 seconds or less, the desired emotion is there. High resolution pictures is the most important thing. Secondarily, you want to have good headlines, that get right to the point, less is more. And then thirdly, you want to have the core piece of information. You want to have name ID all over the place. My rule of thumb is I want my candidate's name to be on there 6 times more. 6 times is the magic number. And it should be large font as often as possible to increase name ID. So all of these things are really important. Examples of bad mail that we've seen from others is, when there's too many words, the pictures are low resolution, and then some of the obvious, errors where they get the district wrong or they misspell the name of a candidate. Those are some amateur mistakes. But the more common mistakes are it's poorly designed, so it's aesthetically ugly. That immediately is a turn off, no matter how good your writing is. And when they try to communicate with too many words. So less is more, have a concise, tight message, and use high resolution pictures. That's very important for mail.
You mentioned the importance of good pictures of your candidate, but what about finding those pictures of maybe your opponent? Because I think that's
Oh, I
another
love
art
this.
form.
Oh, this is an art form I love doing. I mean, this is the other side of politics. Look, I love doing negative and contrast mail. Things that really off your opponent. This is human psychology, especially using a picture of your opponent when they're talking at a press conference, like
Mhm.
with their mouth open, like your opponent is going to hate that. They're psychologically going to hate it, which means you've done your job. So use pictures of your opponent with their mouth open. Again, you're not doing anything that's out of
That's
bounds. You're
them.
not doing right.
Yeah,
Like that was a picture of them, right? But psychologically, candidates hate men, male candidates, female candidates, they all hated a picture where their mouth is open when they're talking. They hate that stuff. So those are excellent pictures to use in contrast and direct mail. The other thing that I don't like in this industry, and we as a professional firm that has done over 1,000 mail pieces, we always make sure we're upholding integrity here, is I don't like it. We've never done this, and I don't like it. I never like seeing this in the industry when they take a candidate that they're doing opposition or contrast mail on, and they darken their skin or they
mhm,
darken some features. That is bad for many reasons, and that is not a good way to do it. So again, there's a good professional way to do contrast opposition mail where you're really getting under your opponent's skin, but there's a bad way to do it as well. A good way to do opposition and contrast mail, you are using actual arguments and things that they said that are not congruent, not in alignment with the electorate today. And you cite it up with research, and you have, again, tight headline, less writing is more. You're evoking that reaction immediately, right? So if your message here is to try to cast your opponent as a flip-flopper, someone who's inauthentic, not true to their word, you can do it in a very professional way. It does not reflect well on any strategist, any firm, on the politics profession when people get really ugly, right? There's a professional way to do, opposition contrast mail.
And that was an excerpt of our Dispatches from Planet Albany conversation with Trip Yang, founder and CEO of Trip Yang Strategies. To hear more of the conversation, including how he's exploring the use of artificial intelligence in campaign work, check out Dispatches from Planet Albany at capitalpressroom.org or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.